Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the US Embassy in Berlin and America's North Rhine-Westphalia, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to tonight's discussion on Beethoven, a global phenomenon. My name is Benjamin Becker. I'm the managing director of America House North Rhine-Westphalia. That's a transatlantic NGO located in Germany's largest state, North Rhine-Westphalia, where also the Beethoven House is located in Bonn. We offer events on politics, culture, business, and education, and we pride ourselves in a diverse event portfolio covering both current political affairs, as well as offering concerts and discussing cultural phenomena. So it is most fitting for me that today, in the midst of the extended Beethoven anniversary, we offer this session on Beethoven as a global phenomenon. Our distinguished panelists, Dr. Erika Burman, Dr. Julia Ronge, and Malte Böker, will be introduced by our moderator tonight, Mr. Robin Merrill. But before I hand over to him, it is my distinct pleasure and honor to present to you, that's who I was referencing, another Robin, a female one, who has honored us with her pre-recorded video greeting. I'm talking about no one less than the highest ranking representative of the US Embassy in Berlin, the Chargée d'Affaires, Miss Robin Quinville.
Hi. This month, Germany is celebrating the 250th birthday of Ludwig van Beethoven, and the world is joining in on the party. In the United States, from New York to Seattle, to San Francisco, to San Antonio, to Orlando, to Washington, D.C., and points everywhere in between, live anniversary concerts were planned. Most had to be canceled, and many have gone virtual. At the 1970 bicentennial, the American composer and conductor Leonard Bernstein said, "It's almost like celebrating the birthday of music itself." 50 years later, Bernstein's words still ring true. Beethoven is very present in America's classical music scene, as well as in our popular culture, in music, film, art, and even cartoons. When I was growing up, I was a big fan of the Peanuts comic strip. One of my favorite characters was Schroeder, the musical prodigy, seated at his toy baby grand piano. Overhead, sheet music often played a role in the story. The music was usually by one composer, Ludwig van Beethoven. Schroeder's musical dedication was the source of many jokes. There was a closet full of replacement pianos and Beethoven busts. He was occasionally frustrated by his friends' lack of appreciation, but he never gave up. Charlie Brown frequently got knocked down, but Schroeder always persevered. Music was his magic, as it is for countless people around the world. Beethoven's birthday was always a special day for Schroeder. He even tried to get his school to give him the day off to celebrate. And so, in the words of Chuck Berry, another immortal in the music world, roll over, Beethoven. Happy 250th birthday.
Thank you, Ms. Quinville, and happy birthday from my side as well. Now, before I hand it over to our moderator, please allow me to say a few last words. First of all, if you like tonight, please do come back. We offer a lot of things. There is a website, there is a circle of friends and donors. You know the drill. We look forward to seeing you again. Also, many thanks to the teams who've made sure that tonight's event runs most smoothly again. That's for the US Embassy, Ms. Kerstin Reichert, and for America's North Rhine-Westphalia, my dear colleague, Katharina Kiefel, who is managing things in the background as we speak. And now I would like to introduce to you tonight's moderator, Mr. Robin Merrill. He's a native of Salisbury, Great Britain, but has lived in Germany for most of his life. Robin is a talent of many facets, and I would like to introduce him to you as a musician, presenter, producer, and journalist. Though I prefer the German version of his biography, which includes his role as a conférencier. I love that word. And in this spirit, enjoy tonight's discussion and please welcome tonight's conferencier, Mr. Robin Merrill.
Well, hello. Welcome to this virtual event on Beethoven, specifically Beethoven as a global phenomenon 250 years after his birth. Thanks to the American Embassy, thanks to America House in North Rhine-Westphalia, who are doing all the technical stuff. I particularly thank you for doing that. I'm Robin Merrill. I'm not an expert on Beethoven, but as you've heard, I have three wonderful guests who are. So I'll be asking them all sorts of questions. And if you want to ask a question, you can do this by going on the bottom of your screen to the Q&A button, or in Germany, that would be the F for Frage and A for Antworten button. And you can write in there. Somebody may send a few through to me. And at the end, if we have time, we will certainly ask some of those questions. Right, let me introduce our wonderful panel. First, go over to California, and it is Dr. Erika Burman, Director of the Ira F. Brilliant Center for Beethoven Studies at the San Jose University in California. That, incidentally, is a museum and research center devoted entirely to the great man's works. Give us a wave, Dr. Burman. Yes. No, don't be confusing. That's Dr. Julia Ronger. She is a musicological researcher at the Beethoven Archive in Bonn, here in Germany. Indeed, the curator of the most amazing collection of Beethoven's original scores, which we'll come to a little later, in the Beethoven House there. We also have with us Malte Bürker, who is director of the Beethoven House in Bonn and also artistic director of Beethoven 2020, all the celebrations surrounding the 250th anniversary of a great man. We'll come more to those celebrations in a little while because, of course, they've been extended. And we'll talk about him being a global phenomenon. But I'd like to start off by asking all three of you, just by way of introduction, to briefly say, you're all sort of incredible academics and know so much about him, but what does he mean to you personally? Let's start with you, Erika Burman in California. What does he mean to you emotionally?
Hi, well, greetings from California, where it's just after 9 in the morning here. I suppose, first of all, Beethoven for me is what brought me to California. You may be able to hear from my accent. I grew up in Scotland, and that's very appropriate when we're thinking about Beethoven as a global phenomenon, that there is a center devoted to Beethoven here in California. My personal journey with Beethoven is as a performing musician. I started as a violinist, and I came to the music that way. And Beethoven's music just always grabbed me in a way that other music didn't necessarily do so immediately. So I have this very formative memory of playing the Eroica Symphony in the second violin section as a teenager. And just there was something so vibrant about the whole experience. I was there with my friends and the music was exciting. And so I had little interest in the history until later, but now that I am a historian, I find the subject endlessly fascinating.
Okay, Dr. Julia, what is it about his music that fascinates you so much?
For me, Robin, Beethoven is first of all a fascinating subject of research. So I'm really fascinated in his writing process, in the sketches, but also in the way he creates music. Emotionally, I'm not very touched by Beethoven. I prefer music of other composers, but as a subject of research, nothing is better than Beethoven.
We'll come back to that because I was in the treasure trove of the Beethoven House. We'll come back to that. Malte Bürker, what does the great man mean to you? What's so special about him?
Hello from Bonn, and great to be with you. Beethoven occupied my time for 8 years now. And I must say, there's been a very intensive time, but it never became boring. Quite the contrary, it was getting more and more fascinating. And as a specific answer to your question, I would like to quote somebody whom I met many years ago, She used to be the director of the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and we met by chance. And when she found out that I'm the head of the Beethoven House, she said, "Oh my goodness, Beethoven is like our house god, and he saved our lives, the life of my husband and me, so many times." And I found that is the best way of phrasing what Beethoven can mean to people, you know, that he has a direct impact on their lives, and that's true for me as well. So that's I would like to quote this here.
Malte, you spent years preparing Beethoven 2020, all the celebrations here in Germany and around the world. So much of it didn't happen because we all know why, because of this dreadful pandemic. You've extended the anniversary year very wisely, I should say, into this one. We'll all forget 2020, I think. Tell us more. What's happening this year?
Well, the idea became quite urgent in March already last year, because we had prepared a year full of events, not only in Bonn, but throughout of Germany. More than 200 events with various actors and artists, ensembles. And in March, we had this first lockdown. And of course, the immediate question was, how long is this going to take? And we, at that time, believed that there might be a chance that some of this can be saved, and that the creative energy behind all these projects can be still realized if we allow the funding to be extended until September the following year. And I must admit that if you look what has happened so far, from out of these more than 200 projects, about half of it has been realized last year. Many big projects. Some of them were we could present even to audiences. A lot had to be done via streaming through the internet. And another 100 projects we expected to take place probably this year. The situation now is that the outlook is not so positive here in Germany. Rather than that the numbers of COVID decline, it's quite a stable amount, and we do not know how the development will be. Some people speak about a second and third wave, so we are not yet sure what the overall impact will be of COVID to this Beethoven celebrations.
Okay, people should obviously keep a look at your website, see what's going on. I want to, before I go to Erica and ask about celebrations in America, I want to quickly ask you about the Pastoral Project, because that kind of proves him as a global phenomenon. Don't know how many times we're going to have to say that word this evening. But the Pastoral Project was involving musicians from around the world to give their take on the relationship between the arts, nature, and the Pastoral Symphony. I know you had a lot of resonance from all around the world. I mean, how global was it?
Well, the idea was simply Beethoven at his time composed a symphony dealing with the emotions of man in nature. And we asked, how would we describe our relationship to nature today? And it was more than 500 artists from around the world and ensembles who participated in this project. At the end, we signed a declaration that expressed the responsibility of artists also to engage for more sustainable development. And there was quite a huge interest from American actors and artists. Maybe most of our audience will know Marin also, the conductor, who was one of the driving forces. Yo-Yo Ma participated in this declaration. Ken David Mazur. So there were quite a few American artists part of this undertaking, but it was, you know, it was much more than a pure Western collaboration. There were people from Russia, from Asia, so it really became a global initiative, simply saying that if we look at the status of the world today, we need to have utmost creativity to transform the way we live together into a more sustainable way. And we as artists want to be part of this transformation. And this is one of the first really global initiatives where artists could express their identification with these UN principles and UN goals for sustainable development.
Okay, Dr. Erika, going back to the 250th anniversary, there were obviously set to be celebrations in America. What's happened there, and has it been extended there?
Well, I'll speak for the Ira F. Brilliant Beethoven Center where I work. My experience was, well, everyone's experience was incredibly strange last year, but I joined the Beethoven Center here exactly 2 years ago, where I started the job. And of course, my first year was spent preparing for the anniversary year. And then last year it was grappling with exactly the same things that we've just heard about from Malta. So the not knowing how long this was going to last, kicking things down the road a little bit, and having to deal with it that way. So my experience is that we had some quite local celebrations planned here, concerts, performances, a ball, which have all had to be cancelled. We've had no live performance here at all since the start of the pandemic. So yeah, I mean, I found that things became very busy online in December. One thing that this pandemic has taught us is new ways of connecting. So for instance, what we're doing right now, this Zoom webinar connecting us here from Germany and California, I think that's not something that would have occurred to me to do before this pandemic. There was a lot more traveling, and then that becomes logistically difficult. So in a strange way, the pandemic connected a lot of things up on a smaller scale. So I found in December, I was getting invitations from all kinds of societies and organizations to do this kind of thing, to talk, to watch recordings of performances together. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of this. We haven't officially extended our anniversary year. We are going to present things when we can that had to be delayed. But we have sort of lived with the fact that 2020 became the COVID year for Beethoven, and we're just having to move on from that and make the best of it.
Just briefly, because you left Europe 2 years ago, you've been in America. How big is Beethoven in America compared to Europe? Is he as big? Would you say?
I would say, I mean, not on the scale of Germany, because you know that amazing Jubilee celebration that was planned really, you know, comes from the whole country participates in that. I suppose the arts are organized slightly different in America, so there isn't that kind of universal organization. But certainly Beethoven is the big figure in classical music, and absolutely a cult figure in some ways. So for instance, the Beethoven Center where I work was started by a Beethoven enthusiast who collected and was just so gripped by Beethoven that he wanted to create a center that would be available to scholars and people who are generally interested. So that's something amazing here actually, is that there are so many people who just love Beethoven and just want to know more and to find out more. So they come and visit the center, and there's things to look at. And we have a society called the American Beethoven Society, which has subscribers who participate and help raise funds for things like that. So it's very much a composer who really fires people up here. And so I've really encountered a lot of real passion and love from people, which has been really nice.
That's great. Let's move on. I want to talk about the scores. Obviously, I'm going to come to Dr. Julia here, and I should explain to anybody listening that last year I met Malte and Julia in Bonn at the Beethoven House, and I had one of the most memorable moments of last year there. I was very privileged to be allowed with a camera team into the treasure trove, the Schatzkiste of Beethoven House. And it was I have to say, it was one of those spine-tingling moments for me, seeing the score of the Pastoral Symphony before my very eyes, the original score over 200 years old. And I learned from you, Dr. Julia, that, and saw that there are a surprising number of original scores of his works 200 years on. You're dealing with these scores on a daily basis. So what can we still learn from these scores today?
So I think first of all, what is important to say that we can still learn from Beethoven's scores, because people think Beethoven is so famous, we just know everything about him. This is not true. There is still, for hundreds of years of Beethoven research before us, because there are still years we don't know what he did in 1797. This is a totally blank year. We don't know anything about this year. And so the same for scores and for the creative process. And what we can learn when we look on the scores, or mostly on the sketches, that he is, of course, a genius. Nobody doubts that Beethoven is a genius, but he was a worker too. This is not only coming from heaven down to him and he writes it down. This is hard work to create a symphony like the Pastoral Symphony. And he did work, and he made errors, and he made corrections, and he stopped some processes and restarted them, just as we do. And we are not geniuses at all. So I think this is very important to see that even gifted people, gifted men, more gifted than we are, have to work, and it's blood and sweat, and not only inspiration.
I mean, it is said that every single form of music he completely transformed in his day, from piano sonatas to string quartets to the mighty symphonies. Was everything he touched brand new at the time?
Everything is a very strong word. Okay. I'd not say everything, but the important works, yes. I'm not sure if he did it for purpose. It's just, it came this way, you know. But he was trained on tradition, and he transformed it. I think it's part of his character. It was not, he didn't sit down saying, today I write a brand new sonata like nobody did before. This was not the plan, but it happened for almost every of his famous works.
But just one more, a small thing, but did people then know he was a genius? I mean,
yeah.
I'm intrigued that so much has been preserved, and perhaps that's the reason that people thought that has to be preserved for future generations.
Yeah, and this is very interesting, because people came to his concert because they knew there will be something new of Beethoven, and then they listened to it, and normally the first reaction was not enthusiastic, but just in worse. They didn't understand it. They found it mostly bizarre, sometimes ugly, disgusting. Often they didn't really like it. And then the next, so the first symphony, they wondered about the winds, so many winds, too much winds. But when the next new symphony came, the last one became tradition. So for the next new, they just found something new, they found bizarre, they couldn't understand. And then they compared to the other one, and the other one became something very beautiful. And this happened for almost every genre. And what I find very, very interesting, because we lost this positive way of thinking. Often critics said, I found it bizarre, but perhaps it's me who didn't understand. Today we always say, yes, it's bizarre and this is ugly. We don't doubt ourselves. You will never find a famous critic saying, I found it ugly, but perhaps I didn't understand it. So, yeah. And this often happens. The reviews of the time says, yeah, it was a little bit bizarre, but perhaps later people will understand better than we do.
Just to finish this off, I should mention to people I was very lucky to see the Pastoral Symphony. What I do know, though, is any scholars or interested parties out there, you can actually see an enormous amount of the scores on the internet, on your web, on the Beethoven House website. Am I correct?
Yeah, you can see all our authentic material. Not most of it, but everything.
Yeah. Oh,
everything we have on authentic material is fully digitized on our website.
Yeah. Let's move on and talk about Beethoven's influence on modern music. And one of the films that was made in conjunction with the 250th anniversary was called A World Without Beethoven ? This was made by DW Deutsche Welle TV, who I work for, who are the German international broadcaster, for those who don't know. A lot of questions posed in that film that really concern us this evening. Dr. Bormann, Wynton Marsalis, the great jazz trumpeter, says in that documentary, there would be no jazz without Beethoven. What do you think of that?
Wow. I suppose, yeah, what we get from Beethoven is just this incredible drive for saying something. There's something about the music that really communicates. And I can imagine that translates into just about any music. You know, this sort of taking the music and really trying to use it and say something with it. And there is also something about Beethoven's music that has just got such an iconic status. There are some works, the Moonlight Sonata, the Ode to Joy from the Ninth Symphony, the Fifth Symphony, that just have this place in culture that is there to stay. And I think that also is something that inspires people. So there's been so many different takes on well-known Beethoven music. You can find well-known Beethoven translated into just about anything from Indian raga to rap to salsa. And I think that has something to do with the icon of Beethoven. And this came out quite a lot. I don't know if this is something that we might talk about anyway, is the Beethoven icon that came out during the pandemic last year. When things went online, I think the Rotterdam Philharmonic were one of the first off the mark with this Ode to Joy video that they made, which last time I looked had more than 3 million views. And for that was one of the first kind of orchestral music at home. And it's the same music. It's the Ode to Joy, which has come to symbolize so much at so many different times.
I was going to come to that a bit later on. We'll come back to that, let's say, later on. But what about film music? I mean, there is the premise that Beethoven really brought about film scores. I mean, I am so old. No, I'm of a generation that can remember the great Disney classic Fantasia, which had loads of straight Beethoven in it. But if you, for instance, take the Pastoral Symphony as an example, I don't know, for me, I close my eyes and I'm in a nature film with the flutes, you know, the birds and everything. I mean, I think he had a huge, don't you think he had a huge influence on film scoring?
Yeah, I mean, I think Beethoven's symphonies in particular are like films by themselves. There's so much about the way drama unfolds through time in Beethoven symphonies that is just so compelling as drama. And it's the same kind of unfolding of narrative as you get in a great novel or a great play or a great film. There's something that Beethoven is able to do with particularly symphonic music, with the whole orchestra, is just to kind of drag you through a story. And just, I don't know what the secret is, but he's able to just present the climax and the problem and the struggle just at the right time that makes the whole narrative compelling. And yes, I think it's brilliant in Fantasia. It absolutely tells a story, and it works to think of that as a narrative that is, whether it's people or nature or something, there is something about Beethoven's music that is just so dramatic in that way.
I think he also, I mean, if I think of, is it Eric Korngold, who wrote so many film scores, all these German and Austrian composers who went over to America in the 1930s for reasons we all know. And I think they were, you know, being German and Austrian, they're influenced by Beethoven. I mean, I hear film scores where I think I know it's not Beethoven, but there's definite influences there. Pop music, Malte, sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah. On film music, I would like to add a little thought. It was presented to us for the first time 3 years ago at a big exhibition in Paris. At the music museum, they had a big Beethoven show, and they had a whole section on Beethoven in film. And it was like 12, 14 film excerpts that had Beethoven music at very critical points of the film story. And it became very obvious that his music obviously adds a lot of character to the film. The one that probably most people will know is from King's Speech. The father of Queen Elizabeth had to deliver a very important speech when entering war with Germany, and he was somebody who couldn't speak well. And to train his speech, he had a teacher, and in the film there is an underlying music which is the slow movement from the Seventh Symphony. So you find it very often, and it is very psychologically important then, the role that this music plays. And I think it has to do that it's a very narrative music, as Erika just said.
I think it's also fair to say he influenced pop music as well. I mean, there is the idea that he wrote the first riff, as they say, which is da 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 da, and I can think again of I don't think I can name the artist, but there was a sort of pop version made of that. You know, Saturday Night Fever.
You know, I happen to get to know a very fascinating musician actually from the West Coast, Mike Garson, and he's a musician who throughout his life since the 70s performed with David Bowie. And as you know, David Bowie is very important for the development of pop music. And it turns out that Mike, who is still alive, is a vibrant believer in Beethoven. And I found it very, very moving that, you know, somebody who was so close to one of my heroes also is so much into Beethoven's music. And I think he's one of those living examples of pop musicians who really bridge that what we have as a cultural heritage embodied in Beethoven, and who can bridge it into our contemporary music. And what we talked about is that it's probably the approach that you really feel in Beethoven's music that there is the idea of changing something, that there is the will to transform music. And I think this holds true for all the big innovators in music, especially for David Bowie, and that's probably the link and why Beethoven is still so appealing to people who are living today and are creative today.
Julia, we talked about how he changed so many things. Was he simply the pop star of his day?
Certainly. He was even the first mega star of music history, and he knew it. So he was very aware of being special and different from the others and better than the others.
We are tonight sponsored by America House. We must talk about Leonard Bernstein and Beethoven, and I'll start by apologizing in case I say Bernstein. That's because I've lived in Germany for 30 years, but it is of course Leonard Bernstein. He stated long ago that Beethoven, stated long ago that music conveys mental messages in sensual terms, and I always think of Bernstein as being a very sensual musician. Dr. Burman, perhaps first, as you're in America, why do you think Bernstein was so obsessed with Beethoven? Kindred spirits, perhaps?
I mean, probably for very similar reasons to the artist that Malte has just mentioned, and anyone who's just really grabbed by Beethoven. And I think with Bernstein, what I associate with Beethoven is he was so desperate to communicate the universal message of Beethoven. You know, Bernstein was a great communicator and was very good at bringing music to people in a way that they can understand. And I think for him, there is a really passionate drive that people understand that there's a message in Beethoven's music that is there, that is universal. For me, another Bernstein association is that very famous performance of the Ninth Symphony in 1989 in Berlin, just after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the fact that for Bernstein, the Ninth Symphony is absolutely the music that needs to be there on that occasion. I think just emphasizes the fact that for him, Beethoven is this universal. Yeah.
Malte, a little bird told me that you're a bit of an expert on Bernstein. Did he, how can I put it, did he solve the mystery, if you like, of Beethoven with his interpretations? I mean, they are very famous interpretations.
Well, I'm probably not an expert, but I had a real privilege of meeting him in person, and I must say he quite influenced my whole life in a way that is hard to speak about. When we met the last time, it was this Berlin concert that Erika just spoke about, and this was one of the reasons why I wanted to present during this Beethoven anniversary year an exhibition here at the Beethoven House, which we called Bernstein's Beethoven, to show in which ways Bernstein became a communicator for Beethoven's music as a composer, as a lecturer, as a conductor. And when we started preparing this exhibit, we found out that there was a continuous narration that he used to describe Beethoven. And it started with I think it was quite a fiction, little story that he wrote at the end of the 1940s, traveling through the Rocky Mountains with his brother and a third person, a writer, and they speak about various topics, and then it comes to why Beethoven, why is he so unusual or so extraordinary, and they struggle for the right answer, and it ends that there's a rightness in this music, an inevitability, I think it's the word, or a mustness, that you has this ability to compose music in a way that you cannot think that there's any other way to express it than the way Beethoven used. And that's funny because scholars would always say it's the surprise in the music that makes it so special. So it's not the rule, it's the contrary to the rule. And I think that's the miracle that Beethoven digs into, and he keeps saying this throughout his life when speaking about Bernstein's music. And so I think there's quite that's an interesting observation that Lenny made. And I think he was just the right conductor and communicator for Beethoven's music, because Bernstein as Beethoven was quite a political figure. He was very much reflecting what was going on in society, not just in the Berlin Wall coming down in 1989 situation. Throughout his life, you know, he was an artist who was very much engaged into social causes against nuclear war, for the gay communities, and where you name it. And I think that's why he was driven to Beethoven's music, that also reflects social issues in a very interesting way.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Julia, why does he have such a wide appeal? I mean, such a mass appeal, not to you personally, but you look at him in academic terms, but is there some sort of formula in his music that makes him so popular?
I think it's just, there are many points which are all dealing together. So first of all, it's very surprising. You never can count on anything. So you can never lay back and hear it beside you. You are knitting, cooking, doing something else. This just, with Beethoven, I think, doesn't really function. You have to listen. So it's very surprising. It's very emotional. It's very beautiful. There are very beautiful melodies, but on the same time, it's very intellectual, because when you think how it's constructed, it's really not, this is not something, you just make some bricks and then there's a wall. So it's really a very intellectual construction, and proportions are always perfect. Beethoven is often struggling with endings. So there are many proofs that finding an end was very difficult for him, getting out of the piece. So there are many sheets of paper where he tries multiple endings. So he found the first one, then he scratches it out. It's not good. Try another one. Then he makes corrections. Then he scratches it out, trying a third one. And at the end, he comes back to the first one, because the first one already was the best. And this struggling for the perfection of proportion, you can see it in the manuscripts, but you can hear it in the music too. Sometimes, you know, these endings where you have 17 times the same chord. You think, why does he do so? But if he would left one out, the proportion would come down. So I think this is, everything all fits together. The melodies, the structure, the intellectual way of building it, and the perfect proportions. And this makes it so just amazingly perfect.
This leads us nicely on to Beethoven's Ninth. Perhaps he didn't know how to finish that, in that it's 74 minutes long. And for people who don't know, I'm sure most do listening in, that it's talk about him influencing today the CD is 75 minutes long because of Beethoven, because it was going to be 60 minutes long, I believe, and somebody at Sony said, we've got to get Beethoven's Ninth onto it. So the CD, when it was first produced, had to be 75 minutes long. A piece of useless information. I want to talk about the Ninth, though, in relation to the lockdown. We've already referred to it a bit, but I don't know about you, but with the situation we're all in, despite the fact that poor old Malta couldn't hold all the concerts of the Beethoven anniversary year, we heard a lot of Beethoven because of the lockdown. I mean, Malta, we spoke on the phone a week ago and you talked about at the very beginning in Italy, people singing the Ode to Joy out of their houses, from their balconies. Why do you think that was? Why did they choose that?
Yes, that was some of the really emotional observations that we made in this first lockdown, that in Italy, these balcony concerts started. People, you know, trying to connect by singing from and making music from their balconies. And very often they whistled, sang or performed the Ode to Joy melody. And it was like an answer to this enforced isolation. You know, everybody had to stay at home, social distancing. And, you know, if you look back to last year, you might find, or you might be able to share the finding that Beethoven was probably the proper jubilee for that special year, because he represents an artist who was himself suffering from social isolation. The more and more his deafness increased. He became deaf at around 1818, so at the age of 48 years. And from that moment on, you know, it's hard to believe, but most of the works he composed after 1818, he could hardly hear himself. And that's the big fascination about Beethoven. How could he do this? How could he write pieces in such a state of deafness that are still for us today are so compelling and so contemporary? And so many people see in Beethoven a kind of role model for somebody who overcomes his own fate through the power that he finds in himself making music, composing music. It gives him strength, gives him what I think is called in English resilience, something that helps you to cope with all these setbacks. And so he was probably the right person to look at in that year. And people, maybe even not consciously, can feel that this is in the music. One of the big labels actually had a slogan for the Soul anniversary year before they even heard about COVID. But they said, you know, Beethoven is the man who plays on against all odds. That's the main idea of their marketing initiative, and it was just right. Look at Beethoven for this year, and yeah, I think we can learn from Beethoven that you can take positive energy out of his music. I once had a very beautiful encounter with Menachem Pressler, who is a pianist from Beaux-Arts Trio, and he said there's so much positive energy, positive attitude towards life in the music, and that's why he adores Beethoven so much, and I think that's what people can feel.
Dr. Erika, you've been in America, as you said, for 2 years. 1 year of that you've been sort of, well, certainly a large amount of it under lockdown. You've had to teach online instead of personally. So you're obviously restricted from getting to know your new country. Has Beethoven been a good companion, perhaps, a solace?
Gosh, yes. More so a little bit further into this pandemic. I mean, it was such a traumatizing time, I think, for everybody. when suddenly the whole world changed. And especially those of us who were planning big celebrations for music and, you know, public celebrations, which involves being out with people and doing things with people. And it was pretty devastating when all of that suddenly collapsed. And for me personally, I didn't listen to much music for the first few months of the pandemic. I don't know exactly why, but I had a kind of numbness. But more recently, yeah, I'm realizing that whatever happens in terms of concerts and performances, music is something that we always have. You know, it's not going anywhere, and especially music like Beethoven's music, that is music that we know and love and that has been with our culture for generations. I think it is a real comfort to realize what is not affected by disasters, and so that has brought me hope, I think. And it's nice to reconnect with what's important about music, and for me that's kind of the enjoyment of it. And I'm obviously looking forward to the time that we can do this with other people again. I know that the next time I attend a concert is going to be really, really special. Yeah. And I think that will be a nice way to refresh, I think, all of our relationship to music.
I think for all of us, I'm quite sure about that. Julia, we did hear so much of Beethoven's music in the lockdown. Why do you think his music is so helpful in the case of adversity? Why is it him? Why aren't we playing more joyous Mozart, perhaps? But it does seem that so many people went to Beethoven.
I think there are multiple reasons. First of all, even if the myth says that Beethoven's life was mostly tragic and not happy at all, his music is always positive in a certain way. And I think the drama is not so big as the myth tells us, and this is what we hear in the music. So the music has something very positive, very life-loving in itself. And I think what is important is that it's very famous. So people know the melodies. And this is why they sing Ode to Joy on the balcony, because everybody can join it.
And they're very hummable melodies, yeah.
So when you sing on a balcony and you hope that your neighbors will join you, you better choose a melody everybody can sing. And this is it sounds very, very simple, but I think this is a very important point, because when you have to join online on small screens of a laptop or something, you better take something everybody knows and everybody loves, because you have to find something you don't struggle for it. It must be easy accessible. And Beethoven is so famous and everybody loves it. So this is an easy point to join the whole world. And I think this is very important too. And
well, this just proves, you're just saying, it proves he is a global phenomenon. I don't think there was any doubt. We weren't debating it as such. I just wanted to add at this point to say that whilst researching this a bit, I discovered that he's more than a global phenomenon. He's actually extraterrestrial, because NASA immortalized Beethoven on data discs, which were on board the space probes Voyager 1 and 2, launched in 1977. And they were sent up into the stratosphere to present the cultural heritage of mankind to extraterrestrial life forms. Well, I have no idea if they've heard Beethoven up there, but there couldn't be a better example for our culture. So he's more than a global phenomenon. He's an extraterrestrial phenomenon. I'm looking at the time, it's 5 to 7. I've got a couple of questions sent in here. I've got one. Yes, one from Angelica that says, What has happened to Beethoven's 10th Symphony? Who wants to answer that? Malta?
Yeah, well, the question must be interpreted. There was a project on this sketches of the 10th Symphony. I mean, the truth is that there are quite a few sketches about another symphony that he was thinking about at the end of his life. And the project that we had planned here in Bonn, it was not planned from our organization, but from the Beethoven Orchestra, together with a big sponsoring institution. They had asked people who have a kind of program, artificial intelligence that can compose music itself, to develop a piece from these sketches. And the idea was, let's see, how does it end if you have artificial intelligence dealing with sketch material from a very outstanding human creative mind? This was supposed to be performed this autumn. This has been postponed to next year. I know that the orchestra already is rehearsing on this, and I'm sure there was such a huge interest in what's happening there, from very critical to very enthusiastic, promising discussions that we saw on this project. I'm sure that this will be one of the bigger stories in this year to come, but nobody has heard it yet, so we'll have to remain very curious.
Dr. Julia, just an algorithm can't make Beethoven's 10th Symphony, can it?
Yeah, I'm of the critical part. So first of all, there are sketches of the 10th Symphony, but not very much. So if you count the huge amount of sketches of the 9th and you compare it to the sketches of the 10th, this is just in the milli section. So and when you see Beethoven's creative process and you see him changing, sometimes even at the very last moment, he makes fundamental changes. You just can't imagine creating a piece out of 10 sheets of paper, and they aren't even 10. So this seems to me, it will be very interesting, but of course it will not be Beethoven.
And we shouldn't be waiting with bated breath for a fantastic piece.
Yeah, and
it might be interesting, as you say.
Anyway, it's a hybrid, because you need a human intelligence to transcribe the real sketches first before the artificial intelligence can start its work.
Yeah. Okay. Here's one for Erica, because you're British and you're in America. Well, but I don't know, anybody can answer. If Beethoven was around today, says Rolf, would he be bigger than the Beatles?
Wow. I mean, it's hard to imagine what kind of music would Beethoven write if he was around now? You know,
that's another question. It's the same kind of question. What would he be writing today?
I mean, I think that's just impossible to be able to answer, because I suppose today's musical landscape is so diverse. Whereas for Beethoven, he had much fewer choices, because there was a tradition that he inherited, and so that is the tradition that he had to work with. But being creative today is a different it's a different thing, because there's just so much. There is no one music tradition. Of course, there never was one music tradition, but at least in Beethoven's day, there was an understanding of what it meant to be a composer. So, I mean, in a sense, I would answer that question by saying that Beethoven already is comparable with the Beatles, but as a cultural icon, as Beethoven who lived 200 years ago.
Yeah, and I think the fact that there's a vast amount of music around today, but Beethoven's right up there. I mean, he's going to be right up there in 100 years' time. isn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
It'll go on forever. What is the future for Beethoven? Well, for now, it's celebrating the 250th anniversary for him, and we'll forget 2020. I'm looking at the time, it is 7 o'clock. I'm told that virtual webinars, are they called, should only go on for an hour. We shouldn't go on, and I don't think we should. I want to thank everybody. Thank you to Dr. Erika Burman in California, to Dr. Julia Ronger and Malte Burke in Bonn. Thanks to the American Embassy in Berlin for putting this all together, the American Consulate in North Rhine-Westphalia, Katharina Kiefel, who's done all the technical stuff, and Benjamin Becker, who we saw earlier. My personal thanks also to Kerstin Reichert from the American Embassy here in Berlin, who put all this together and looked after me. Thank you for listening, or everybody out there. One last thing, just before I came on air, or whatever it's called, on Zoom this evening, I looked on YouTube. And I thought, what shall I look for? Oh, Moonlight Sonata. Let's have the Moonlight Sonata. So loads of versions of the Moonlight Sonata come up. The top one had 162 million clicks. The guy is a global phenomenon. And who's clicking on YouTube? I think there's a lot of young people. Or maybe I'm out of fashion, maybe we should check out TikTok or whatever, but he seems to be as popular as ever. Would you all agree, briefly, before we say goodbye, as popular as ever?
Yes.
Beethoven doesn't need us. He will be there even without us.
Yeah, exactly.
We need him.
Yeah.
We do need him, and actually that has been proved in this terrible pandemic. As I say, so much music has been heard. Anyway, thank you to all. It's been a thrill to see you all, and let's do it all again at some point in the future. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.